Against All Odds family, welcome once again to this show's edition. This is episode 8 already. Can you guys believe it? And for this week, we have our guest, Yaw Asamoah. It's actually hard to introduce him. He's a dear friend of ours, but Yaw just does so much that it's hard to introduce him. But he is here to give us some great nuggets about his life because can you guys believe it? He is retired, as in retired before the age of 50. Yeah, welcome to Against All Odds.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
It's great. Thank you for saying yes. And I know you have so much to share, and this is going to be a great interview. And guys, I just want to say, yeah, I was going to tell us so much, but he is not a financial advisor. And, you know, you'll understand as he goes along, and he will reiterate that when he gets to that point, and everything that he's going to share with us. And it's from his own experience and his own opinions on things that have worked for him. So thank you, Yaw.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, before you get into it, I just want to say congratulations. I've been following the show. It's been incredible. So congrats on the first season. You've had some really good guests. The stories are amazing. And
thank you.
Hopefully I don't screw it up for you today.
You wouldn't be here if I knew you would.
Hopefully your audience doesn't drop off after this.
It's going to be great. It's going to be great. Now, Yaw, you, before the age of 50, you are retired. What does that even mean? Because for a lot of us, it's a dream. We talk about it. You have done it. What does that even mean?
Well, it means I sleep 15 hours a day.
Amazing.
On good days. No, I'm just kidding. But you know, I had a really good career on Wall Street for over 22 years, and then finally decided to call it quits. But in doing that, I wanted to have more freedom, more flexibility to just pursue other things that I'm very, very interested in and passionate about. So I've been involved in a lot of philanthropy, which I'm sure we'll talk about later in the show. I'm also doing some public service projects with the government in Ghana, helping out in a variety of different things. And then also, just most importantly, I wanted to have more time to spend with my family. You know, obviously the career was very demanding, lots of travel, long hours. And so while I still had my good years in front of me, I wanted to be able to spend more time with my kids, my wife, and just be able to have more family time and just enjoy life a little bit. You know, I think sometimes we take for granted that, you know, we have a lot of years to do things and we always sort of put things off. So to avoid that trap and take advantage of opportunities to spend more time with the family while I still could. So yeah, it's been a very good experience so far, and I'm sure we'll get into it later. But
yeah, amazing. And I think you're rightly saying, I think COVID has taught us that, you know, yeah, we just don't know. We just don't know, nor do we have any control.
Yeah, obviously at the time I made the decision, we didn't have COVID yet, but when it did happen, I felt very fortunate that I've been able to make that move ahead of time. It made our lives a lot easier, and it made us, put us in a position where we could deal with the pandemic in a lot more family-friendly way.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, just to go back a little bit to your background. You were actually born in Kumasi, Ghana. You left at the age of 8.
America.
Yeah, Kumerica, Ghana to America, US. You left at the age of 8, which is amazing because you still speak the language so well and you still love your local food. And you, at the age of 8, you actually had to be smuggled out of the country. You had to be smuggled out of Ghana. Can you tell us a little about that? Tell us how that came about.
Yeah, well, you know, Ghana, for I'm sure most of your audience will know, but Ghana went through a period of instability, political and military instability in the 70s and throughout most of the 80s. And my dad was a senior military officer in the 70s. He was in the intelligence service. And so he was sort of involved in a lot of those events at that time in terms of trying to help quell some of those activities. And so when the coup occurred in December of 1981, because of his position in the military, he was on the list of people that were to be captured. Wow. And so obviously the situation was a little bit untenable and dangerous. So fortunately for him, he was able to escape the country and ultimately ended up in the U.S. And then my sister and I came shortly after that. We were taken out of Ghana as well for safety reasons, because obviously we didn't want to risk it. Things were really, really volatile and dangerous at that time. So that's really sort of the background of how we ended up in the U.S. We came to New Jersey, settled in New Jersey. My dad's sister lived here. Okay. And so that's sort of what brought us here. And as they say, the rest is history. But I would say, we have a saying that it's always sort of darkest before dawn. And obviously, with our relocation here in the States, created a lot of opportunities and brought a lot of advantages that we were able to take, benefit from, education-wise, career-wise, so on and so forth. So things ended up well for us.
Well.
Yeah.
Amazing. Now, you came at the age of 8. At the age of 13, 14, you went to boarding school. Now, I'm sure it presented its own challenges. I am not even sure. In the 80s, was drugs one of them? I know there was a drug epidemic in the US around the time.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Growing up in New Jersey, so that really in the urban areas of New Jersey, New York, and most parts of the country, there was a big crack epidemic around that time. So, when parents, a lot of the immigrant parents raising kids at that time, you had to sort of deal with that challenge of how do you keep your kids away from all of that noise, keep them protected, all the violence that was happening at that time. So I think fortunately for me, I was able to go away. Parents sent me away to boarding school in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Just about 30 miles outside of Philadelphia. And that's where I went for my high school years. And so that was obviously a much more quieter setting, more affluent community. I think that, frankly, the biggest change was that it was a predominantly white community. And that was really my first time being in that sort of setting. So there were a lot of cultural adjustments that needed to be made in terms of just getting used to the people and the systems and just understanding how those people lived. Right. And so that was that. But overall, I would say it was a good experience. I was able to get independence at an early age. I left home when I was 13 to go away for high school. So I became very independent very early. And by the time I got to college, I had all of that training and benefit before I got to college. So it was overall a good experience. The other thing, too, I think, being in that community, it exposed me to a lot of possibilities of what one could do, career-wise and just overall with life. And so it was
Yeah. So from then you moved to college after 4 years. Which one did you go to, and what was your experience there in college?
So I went to Brown and studied economics, and I would say that was also a very good experience. And again, we're going into a little bit of a time warp here, but this was mid 90s, right? And so if you really sort of think back, that was sort of the beginning of the internet era. A lot of the .com companies were being formed at the same time. So it was a really exciting time to be in school, because you just felt like the sky was the limit, right? Possibilities were endless in terms of the way the world was going, the way economies were moving, what you could do with yourself from a career standpoint. So I remember that time pretty fondly. I thought it was a really, really good experience. And of course, I built a lot of good, lasting relationships as well, which is probably the most important thing that came out of that experience.
Amazing. So you then, like you mentioned earlier on, you had a 22-year career on Wall Street.
Yeah.
How did you even get interested in that? And how did you get your first job?
Yeah, it's I sort of kind of stumbled onto it by accident.
Oh.
I was always interested in economic development and in Africa. Those are sort of the two things that I was really passionate about when I was in school. And so I studied economics. I did internships with professors, doing economic research type work. So my whole experience during college was geared towards preparing myself for potentially, a career at the World Bank or UN, one of those sort of policy type roles. And that was, and then, I got introduced to some of the investment banks who at that time were coming onto campus to do presentations around what a career on Wall Street would be like. And so that was really my first exposure to that industry and that business.
Wow.
And I quickly realized that that was a much more exciting opportunity than what I had been preparing myself for. And what really attracted me to it was the opportunity to get some really tangible skill set around how to execute transactions. How do you raise capital? How do you help companies, merge? How do you really just drive economic activity from the private sector, right? And it just seemed like it was much more hands-on than what I had been thinking about, in terms of careers in economic policy and research and things like that. So I started exploring it, talking to people at different banks, and the more I spent time researching it, the more I gravitated towards that area as sort of being the right decision for me. And also I was really interested in markets, stock markets and investment. And I remember back in those days, that was really right around the time when the Ghana Stock Exchange had just been formed. And we were sort of moving in that direction as a country in terms of privatization, liberalizing the economy, so on and so forth. So I thought, wow, if I could really sort of learn how these things work, what is the infrastructure and architecture around markets, that's something potentially in the future I could put to good use. And so it sort of came back to my interest in economic development in Africa. I thought this would be Wall Street would be a good vehicle for me to get some experience in that area.
Right. Amazing how we always have our plans.
Yeah.
And then things happen to us, for better or for worse. And then, things change.
Yeah.
But it always ends up for the better. Now, as a Black person, I can imagine there were not many of you in JP Morgan.
That would be a good assumption.
What was the environment like for you, and how did you manage it?
Your assumption is correct. There weren't any senior Black people when I joined the firm. There were a few, junior folks, sort of at the associate level when I joined in my department. So that was good. At least I could see people who were like me in similar roles, but there weren't really any sort of senior Black folks at that time. So senior meaning, people at the executive director or managing director level or group heads. And so I didn't really have that, but you sort of, going into it, I never had that expectation that there would be a lot of Black people there to begin with.
Okay.
So you just sort of, you have to take the environment you're given, not the environment you want, and just make the best of it. And so I formed a lot of relationships, friendships across, different parts of the firm with people of all backgrounds, and got some good mentors and sponsorships. And that was really sort of what gave me my initial boost. I was fortunate to have people take me under their wing and really kind of show me the ropes. Okay. And sort of really help me lay out a plan as to how to succeed.
Okay. So this is interesting. So there were no Black people at that level. Was it something that you ever saw yourself at that, like not having, especially not seeing people looking like you at, say, managing director level? Did you ever think that was a position you would ever achieve then? Of course you did, but at the time, did you think that was possible? And tell us how you rose up through the ranks to get there.
I couldn't even imagine. That just seems so, when you start off as an analyst, it just seemed like so far off. Wall Street's all about surviving the next day, the next month, and the next year, right? You're only as good as your last deal. And so, you know, I didn't have that sort of long-term framework initially. It was all about, how do I perform really, really well at the level that I was at, and then make it to the next immediate level, right? And so I started off as an analyst. And so, okay, how do you go from analyst to associate? That was my initial concern. And then when I became an associate, how do you go from associate to VP? Then from VP to ED, and then ED to MD. So I would say initially it was much more focused on the here and now. What do I do to make sure I'm really, really successful in the here and now to push me to that next level? And then once I get to the next level, I then worry about, you know, what comes after that. So that was sort of my framework in the beginning. I would say that the things that helped me rise are a couple of things that, looking back, I think were really instrumental. First, you know, mentorship and sponsorship. I mentioned that in the beginning. I was really, really fortunate to have good mentorship. So my first boss was Jess Staley, who's now, as you know, the CEO of Barclays. And, you know, when I joined the firm, that they didn't have, I sort of joined impromptu before I was supposed to join officially, because I was home, I was bored, and I called the firm and said, hey, can you guys put me somewhere?
Oh, wow.
They assigned me to Jess's group. He was head of equity capital markets at JP Morgan at the time. And they didn't even have, it was so impromptu, they didn't even have a desk set up for me. So they put me at a conference table right in front of Jess's office. And so every time he would come out, he couldn't avoid seeing me, interacting with me. And so because of that, so, you know, he sort of took me under his wing. Okay. And, really mentored me, and we became really good friends. And he would take me to all these meetings that normally at the analyst level, you would have no business even being in those meetings or those discussions. So at a very early stage, I got really good exposure to high-level client meetings and discussions, and I was in the mix on a lot of really important transactions. And so that really gave me sort of a boost, I would say, beyond the level that I came in at. And I got all of these projects and assignments as a result of the sponsorship and mentorship that I got from Jess. And also other, you know, that example that he set, I think, was followed by other senior people in the department as well. And a lot of other people took me under their wing. And so I really benefited from that. So I would say that's the first and foremost important thing. You know, and I would say that's a little bit of luck, right? You know, when you sort of look at, you know, how did, you know, from a career perspective, how you advance, there's always some element of it that's right timing, right place, right time, and always a little bit of luck. That's not important. They're not being truthful. So that's part of it. The second thing that I would say was really important was that I was really, really motivated to perform well. And so I put in a lot of hours. If there were assignments that were going to take, you know, 10 to 12 hours, I'd make sure I was in the office 15 to 18 hours. And there are some days where I literally worked till 5 in the morning, went home, showered, turned around, and came right back.
Wow.
And it's because it was new to me. It was really my first job, my first corporate experience. As you said, there weren't a lot of Black senior people there. So I wanted to make sure that I built credibility. And so I was really, really focused on error-free work, making sure that if I got an assignment in the project, what I delivered back to my manager was 95% there, and he just needed to make a few tweaks as opposed to taking in something that then needed to be rehashed or revisited. You know, that sort of activity tends to not build confidence. And so if you develop a track record of delivering quality work, error-free work, you start to build confidence in your work, and you start to build a brand, and you sort of become known as, hey, his brand is good. He's the guy that delivers good work. And what happens when you do that is that as plum assignments come up and as projects come up, it inevitably gets shifted your way because people have confidence that you can handle it. So that was another dynamic that I would say contributed to helping me rise through the ranks. And then the third thing, which I thought was really important, was being ahead. You have to think 2-3 steps ahead of your manager and your team all the time. So if you get an assignment, don't just do what's asked of you and take it back. Do what's asked of you and then think about the derivative. Well, if I do this, what's the natural, what comes out of it? What might my manager ask for as a next step? Think about those next steps ahead of time and have answers for them when you get asked about it. That's how you add value, right? And so that was always the focus of mine as well. And then the last thing, which I think was really important, was having original. I'll share an experience with you. I had a very early age in my career. I had an experience with one of my bosses at the time. I was working on a project. I had to prepare a presentation, so I put it together. I thought it was a slam dunk presentation. Went into his office. We were sort of reviewing it page by page. He looked at it, and he literally threw it back at me. And this is the 90s. This is nothing unusual for anybody that has experience. He literally threw it back at me and said, "Well, there's literally no original thought in this.
No,
sort of a rehash of stuff that I could, he could have done himself, right?" So that was a really good lesson in
wake up call.
When you do something, you got to make sure there's at least some original thinking in the work that you do, so that it's differentiated. Don't just rehash things that people already know. Bring something creative to the table. Bring something new to the table. Bring something that someone didn't think about to the table. That, in addition to sort of building your brand, that really sort of solidifies you as someone who adds value. And those are kind of like 4 things that really helped me, that helped push me through the ranks. And of course, as I did that over the first couple of years, I got promoted and kept getting promoted. And that formula, I think, worked really, really well for me right to the end.
Wow. Wow. I love it. You basically grabbed the bull by its horns by not staying at home when you could have. Got yourself in there. You had the door open for you, got yourself in there, and then you worked hard to stay in there. Not only just stay in there, build your brand and get yourself all the way to the top. I love it. Guys, see, I told you Yaw was going to give us amazing nuggets. Now, apart from having that work assignment once thrown at you and saying there's nothing original in here, I'm sure there were some challenges over your 22 years. Do you want to share some of them with us?
Oh, there are a lot of challenges. As I said, on Wall Street, it's very cutthroat, very competitive. You're only as good as your last deal, so you can't rest on your laurels. So, you always have to assume that every year could be your last. And there are times when that was explicitly said to me. If you screw this up, you're done. Right? Wow. But strangely enough, I enjoyed that intensity. I felt that it's almost sort of like playing a sport, right? You go to a basketball game, you hope to win, you practice, you hope to score as many points as you can, but you also know that you may not win every game, and you may not always win a championship, but you have to make that effort, right? So I enjoyed that intensity and knowing that nothing was a given, and there was no job security. You have to perform in order to earn your spot on the team for the next season and the season after that. So that was I think helped build good character and it was a good training ground for being successful in life overall. But some of the challenges, there are a lot of times, and I spent a lot of my career working in the energy sector, helping clients in that space raise capital, think about strategy, corporate finance, M&A, things like that. And if you know anything about the sector, it's extremely volatile. right? It's a commodity sector. It's cyclical. So there are times when you have boom years when oil prices are sky high and there's a lot of money flowing and people are doing lots of deals and things like that. Then there are other times when, you know, the global economy is a little bit softer and commodity prices crash and it's sort of boom and bust and there's not a lot of deals happening. Right. And this is Wall Street's a P&L business, right? You have to deliver revenue. And so there were some lean years when it was really, really difficult. And so I had to find means and ways to stay relevant, to generate different transactions, different revenues to kind of keep things going. And so I looked at different products that I could introduce to the firm. There were, I spent many years helping the firm, push into new areas that we weren't in before during some of those lean years to try to generate some incremental revenue. I helped, branch our business into Canada, for example, which was an area or geography that we didn't have a really strong presence in before. So I was trying to find, ways and means to, stay relevant and to continue, as I said in the beginning, to continue to add value. Right? You can't just sit around and say, "Oh, the market's bad," or "There's not anything happening in my sector." You have to find ways to keep pushing and keep adding value. And I think people respect that, and that all accrues to sort of building that brand that I talked about.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you miss it at all? Do you miss the energy and intensity?
I do at times. I do. It never really leaves your blood, right? What is for so long, it's sort of part of your life. I do miss it. I think I miss mostly the people, right? Because you work with people for so long, they sort of become part of your extended family. You become accustomed to seeing them day in and day out, and sort of being in the trenches with them.
Right.
So I would say that's really the part that I miss the most. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. You were there for 22 years. Yeah. 22 years. What kept you in one organization for so long?
Yeah, I asked myself that many times. There are a lot of times when I thought, man, I got to get out of here. Too much. But look, it's people and quality. Right. You want to be with an organization that has a high level of integrity, where, doing good business is sort of the mantra, ethics, all of those sort of things. And I felt that the firm embodied those sort of really important characteristics, number one. Secondly, I experienced a lot of success. There's an old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? I was there, I was doing well, they kept promoting me, and, everything just seemed to be working really, really well. So, why screw it up? And so an element of that, I really enjoyed the people that I was working with. As I said, they became extended family, and I felt I had a lot of support. And, also I felt a significant level of loyalty to the firm because I got that sponsorship and mentorship from the beginning, right? So there was a demonstration that there was an investment in me and my well-being. And so because of that, I always had a loyalty to the firm. And then lastly, and most importantly, the work was really, really interesting. Every couple of years, there was a new challenge that came up that needed to be dealt with. So it kept the work really, really fresh. It wasn't like I was doing the same thing over and over again. Just to give you an example, when I first started covering the energy sector back in almost 20 years ago, it was right around the time when Enron collapsed. And Enron was the big energy company that blew up in a big scandalous fashion and almost caused a financial crisis back then. But it caused a lot of a big ripple effect across the whole industry. And so many companies needed to clean up their balance sheets and refinance and do all sorts of transactions to help them get out of the wake of the difficulties that Enron had caused. And so that alone provided me a couple of years of really, really good interesting work.
Right.
And, fast forward a few years later, you had the oil and gas shale revolution in the U.S., where all these new technologies led to the humongous discoveries of shale oil reserves in the U.S., and the U.S. became a net oil exporter instead of an importer. And that whole dynamic created a whole host of work and finances, and taking companies public, all these things that needed to be done. So I would say like every 3, 4, 5 years, there was some new exogenous dynamic that came up that created sort of almost like a new job.
Right.
And that kept it really, really interesting, and that kept me engaged from that on.
Awesome. And what made you finally decide to leave?
Well, it wasn't random. I always went into it. When I originally went into Wall Street, I didn't think that I would necessarily be there for 20 years. I thought, okay, this is going to be a 2-3 year gig, maybe 4 years. I wanted to learn the skill set, and then maybe I'd leave, go to business school, and then go off and do something else. I always sort of envisioned that I would have 2 or 3 different careers. And not necessarily have just one in one company. So I always knew that at some point I wanted to shift. So that was one driver. Secondly, as I said in the beginning, you can't take time for granted. I had a really good run, had made a lot of accomplishments, and I just felt that it was a good time. You want to leave when you're on top. You don't want to be pushed out. We had another really interesting saying on Wall Street, which is, the bullet has left the gun. The only question is, when is it going to hit you? Right? So at some point you might get hit with the bullet. So if you get an opportunity to exit gracefully, you should do that. And so I thought it was a good time. I had a good run. It was a good opportunity to really just step back and just spend more time with my family. Be more involved in what my kids were doing, because I had missed out on a lot of stuff while I was traveling and being busy doing investment banking. And also I wanted to pursue more philanthropic initiatives. As you know, Peter and I have been very involved in Focused Foundation of Orthopedics and Complex Spine, which is a nonprofit orthopedic hospital based in Accra. With a U.S. foundation. And so I became very involved in that organization, wanted to spend more time helping them restructure and raise money for what I thought was a really good cause. Became involved in other philanthropic organizations as well. And I wanted to just be more engaged in public service, doing some advisory work with different government agencies in Ghana and things like that. And it's really hard to do that if you have a full-time job as an investment banker. And so I felt comfortable that I had a good enough run that this was a good time for me to be able to transition and have the opportunity to pursue some of those other things that I'm pretty passionate about.
Awesome. 22 years all the way to MD sounds like a pretty good run.
Yeah, it wasn't an easy decision, I'll tell you. It was really, I struggled with it because obviously you sort of weigh the pros and cons, right? Because if you're doing something for a really long time, exiting is a scary proposition, right? Because all of a sudden you don't have that safety net that you're used to having. And you have time and freedom to pursue other things that you're passionate about, but you never know how that's going to go.
No.
Right. And so it was scary. It wasn't an easy decision, but something that we discussed as a family, and ultimately came to a conclusion that, look, you've got to, you're only here for a short time. You have to make the most of it, and you have to make an impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And now here you are. Actually, before we go into this part, guys, if you're watching and you haven't shared it, this is good. So please share it. Those on YouTube, those on Facebook, please share it with your friends, because Yaw still has a lot of good nuggets to share. Now, Yaw, you're living the dream. You are retired before the age of 50. It's something that people talk about, like just exiting the rat race. People talk about it's hardly a reality for most. You have done it. You made it happen. How did you manage that?
That's a really that's a really good question.
All of us want to know.
I think it took a lot of planning, and I would say I was very deliberate about it. I sort of set that goal. I knew that this is something that I would want to do at some point. It was just a question of when would be the right time. Right. So I didn't just wake up one day randomly and say, you know, gosh, you know, I want to go do philanthropy. Let me just check out, and this is a good time to do it. It was actually, I would say, 7 to 10 years in the making. So I set a goal for, you know, I set this as a goal and an objective that I wanted to accomplish, and sort of did the math and figured out, okay, what do I need to have in place in order to be able to get there? You know, things like, you know, being able to cater for college tuition for the kids, you know, being able to deal with, you know, housing and mortgage finances, all of these sort of mundane sort of things that are part of life. You sort of have to be able to account for it. And so we set a plan for 7, 10 years and religiously executed that plan to get to the point where, you know, I felt that, you know, that was something we could do. So that would be my takeaway is, you know, you have to think about what your goals are, and you have to lay out concrete steps. You know, whether it's a spreadsheet, whether or not you want to hire an advisor, whatever it is you have to do, but you have to lay out concrete steps in the game plan to actually get to it. And every year you have to assess how you're tracking on that plan. Are you exceeding it? Are you meeting it? Or are you underperforming? If you're underperforming, it may mean you have to push out the timetable a little bit,
right?
So on and so forth. And I think, and you also have to be flexible, because on the timetable that I originally set out, I would have left probably, I think I would have retired maybe back in 2015, 2016. But I decided not to do that because, as I said before, in the previous question you asked, another opportunity came up at work where, you know, the energy industry was going through a really difficult time. Oil prices had plummeted in 2014, 2015, and it created a really big host of opportunities to, you know, do transactions and generate lots of revenue for the firm, and also just to be involved in some really, really interesting transactions from a career perspective. And I didn't want to miss out on that opportunity. So I deferred the plan a little bit, so I could be involved in those transactions before then deciding to exit. So, you know, you have to stay flexible. You have to stay nimble. You have to stay flexible, and you have to take opportunity when it knocks.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's good that your flexibility didn't involve the fact that you were not hitting your targets. But that's a great opportunity came along. Now, yeah, I'm sure a lot of people like me want you to break it down a bit further. Give us some practical examples. What was your strategy? I know your friends tell us you were very frugal. Is that is that all it takes? You were also threatening to quit every year, but you stayed in there. So tell us exactly. Give us some practical examples of some of the things that you did to get you in this position.
I wouldn't say I was frugal. That's just a nasty, unsubstantiated rumor that's out there. So I definitely am not frugal, but I would say that I proactively made an effort to sort of live below my means. And, you know, so if I could afford to go out and buy, you know, 3 super luxury cars or buy this fancy house or this or that, doesn't necessarily mean that one should do that, right? So it's just a question of short-term consumption versus longer-term goals.
Right.
So I proactively made sure that each year, as we, you know, followed the plan, that we lived, you know, a little bit below the means, so that there was a cushion and an excess, which then over a 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10-year period, that builds up.
Right.
That builds up. That could end up being, you know, the nest egg that you can take advantage of to have more flexibility. So I would say that that's probably the way that I approached it. The second thing is that, you should never just rely on your job as sort of your sole source of income. You have to broaden your horizons a little bit. As Ghanaians would call it, you have to always have a little bit of a side hustle. Right? And so I've always been sort of an avid investor. And so with my wife and I, we manage a portfolio of assets across different asset classes, real estate, stocks, bonds, what have you. And so that was always a part of our plan. And so having that as sort of something we focused on, in addition to work and those sort of things, I think those are really instrumental to making sure that you're able to meet goals. And then of course there's the basics, right, Sylvia? Making sure you're adequately insured and having the right emergency funds and things like that. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But those are just basic, blocking and tackling. I think those are all things that helped put us in a position where we could have some of these options available.
Right. Amazing. I'm taking notes. Do you feel fulfilled, Yaw? And how do you fill your time now that you have more time on your hands?
It's ironic because I feel like I'm actually more busy now than I was when I was working. And I'm not kidding. And Peter can attest to this as well. I'm very fulfilled. I spend a lot of time doing the nonprofit work, as I said before. I'm on a number of boards as well. So that involves doing a lot of meetings and reviewing documents and helping with strategy and doing a lot of fundraising. And so I keep fairly busy. And then also with our investment activities, that also keeps me pretty busy. I spend a lot of time reviewing proposals and different initiatives that people are trying to fund and giving advice on those sort of things. And of course, there's also the family responsibility. So now with more free time, I have to take the kids to school in the morning and go to all the sporting events and things like that. And so so I feel very, very fulfilled. One thing that I unfortunately didn't get a chance to do is when I initially decided to leave banking, I thought that we would have more time for travel and leisure, and had all these grand ideas about going to all these funky places that we hadn't had a chance to visit before. And unfortunately, COVID got in the way, so we haven't been able to take advantage of that. So I'm hoping that in the years ahead, once things get back to normal, we'll be able to take advantage of some of that, because I think that's very important. That sort of leisure and family time is critical.
It's important, yeah. And I want to stress on something that you mentioned, that you're not sitting on your laurels. You're still growing your money. Well,
if you don't grow it, it's going to run out pretty quickly. So it's like an hourglass. You have to make sure.
Keep filling it somehow. So so he's got his investments and he's growing them. So is there anything you would do differently looking back?
That's a really good question. From a career standpoint, I spent all my career based in the States in New York. I had a global portfolio. I worked on a lot of global transactions, but that's different from perhaps living somewhere else, right? So if I had an opportunity to perhaps live in London or Hong Kong or one of the other global financial centers, doing transactions in those jurisdictions, I think that would have been fun. And I looked at doing that sometime in the late 90s. I almost did that, but something came up and I wasn't able to take advantage of it. So looking back, that's one thing that I would have changed. The other thing I would have changed is I think I was probably a little bit of a workaholic. As I said in the beginning,
right?
Something was 12-hour task, I'd spend 15 on it to make sure it was done really, really well. Now, that benefited me career-wise and in terms of, moving me ahead.
Right.
But, there's a cost to that, right? Which is less personal time, less family times and things like that. So in hindsight, I think it would have been interesting or better if I would have maybe dialed it back just a little bit, so I could have had much more leisure time to be able to enjoy more time with friends and family. So that's one thing that's one adjustment I would have made.
Yeah. Now, with the present circumstances with COVID and all, it's tough enough financially for a lot of people. A lot of people have lost their jobs, so they've had to cut back on spending. Things are tough. What are some things that people can do to be financially resilient?
That's a really good question. It's a question that I get asked often. People, because you're right. These are really, really challenging times, and people are having to deal with health issues and all sorts of unexpected events. But I would maybe step back a bit and put this in some context, right? Obviously, we're dealing with COVID now, but if you look over the last 20 years, we've gone through this sort of unexpected, big, sort of global disruptive event before, right? You had 9/11 20 years ago, completely out of the blue, unexpected, caused a lot of job losses and economic destruction, particularly in the New York, New Jersey area. You had the .com crash shortly thereafter. And then, 6-7 years later, you had the great financial crisis, which was global in nature. That was 2008, 2009. And of course, now we're dealing with COVID, right? So it seems like certainly within every decade, there's one or two big disruptive, economically disruptive events that have happened. And so the lesson from that is you have to expect the unexpected, right? From a planning standpoint, in terms of how you manage your finances, how you manage your career, you have to expect the unexpected. And so what that means is that you have to build your own safety net, right? So there's a couple of tangible things that I think people should really be looking at. Number one, you have to make sure you have, and of course, let me preface these comments by saying that everyone should, if you have a financial advisor, whatever, you should consult your own financial advisor, tax planning, things like that. That's not my area, but these are just from personal experience. But you should have an emergency fund, Sylvia, right? If you read a lot of the financial planning books that are out there or talk to the planners, traditionally the advice was people should have, 3 to 6 months of an emergency fund. Well, everything we've learned in the last 20 years suggests that that's completely inadequate, right? These crises tend to be long in duration, and the disruption could be pretty long, right? If you look at how we're dealing with COVID, it started in February, and now we're almost at the end of the year. We're almost 10 months into it. And so you have to have a true emergency fund, which I think is distinct from your savings. This is something that is designed to deal with these sort of unexpected situations where you may lose your job, or you may be unable to work, or you may be furloughed, and you have to draw on this pool of funds to be able to fund your monthly living expenses. So figure out what mortgage is, what your car payments, what your utility payments, all the expenses that you have in a given month, and multiply it by 12. I think at a minimum, you should have a 12-month emergency fund, and ideally more like an 18-month fund. So that's something that I think people, if they haven't already done it, something people should really be thinking about. The second thing that I think is really critical is to make sure that you're adequately insured. Everyone sort of thinks they know about insurance or think they're insured, but a lot of people have insurance, but they don't have the right amount of insurance, right? Having insurance is just a first priority, but do you have the right amount? And people tend to think of insurance as just life insurance, but insurance is also disability insurance. Right. If you have an illness, an unexpected illness, and you're not able to work, You know, there are insurance policies out there that cater for that type of event or outcome, and that's something people should look into. But having the right amount of insurance for your family, I think, is really important. I think that the sort of the rule of thumb and the minimum people should be thinking about as a base case is 5 to 7 years of income. So, for example, if you earn $100,000 a year, as a starting point, you should have at least a $500,000 to $700,000 insurance policy to make sure that you're creating a bridge for your family in the event something unexpected happens to you, God forbid. You've created a bridge for your family so that they can manage for some interim time period until, you know, they get on their feet or they find alternate sources of income. So 5 to 7 years of your income is your base case, I think, from insurance coverage standpoint. And you add to that big items. You know, once you have 5 to 7 years of your base case, you add to that any large expected expenditures that your family might have. So, for example, you have kids that are expected to go to college. Are you going to have to pay large college tuition bills? Is there a desire to purchase a home in the near future, or is there a large mortgage that's outstanding on your existing home? Those are all sort of considerations that you have to think about when you're figuring out what is the right level of insurance to get. And I think oftentimes people don't think about that. They really just sort of think about insurance in the context of, I just need something to pay for my funeral, and then that's it. Right? So there's that. The third leg to the stool that I think is really important is investing. You know, as I said, I'm very passionate about investing, but I think it's something that too many people in our community don't focus on. Right. There's some really interesting statistics out there that some stat statistics actually that show that only 33% of African American households are invested in the market, compared to 65% for the non-Black populations or the white population, that's a staggering figure. And what that means is there's so much wealth creation that people are missing out on or uninformed about. Right. That needs to be a part of our planning. If you think about the last 20 years, when we had the last financial crisis in 2008, 2009, the Federal Reserve stepped in and created monetary easing and had a policy to really stimulate growth in financial assets. And the markets have been on fire since that time period, an average return of 8 to 9% a year. So over a 20-year period, if you've invested even $50,000 going back to 2001, you would have tripled that money by now, right? Wow. So that's a tremendous tailwind that a lot of people are not taking advantage of because they're not invested, they're not knowledgeable about it. So again, you may need to consult an advisor, you may need to get some external help, but this should absolutely be part of everyone's equation when you're thinking about how you build financial resiliency. Become more informed about investing and looking at those types of opportunities. And then lastly, the last thing I would point out is, as part of, once again, the Federal Reserve is keeping interest rates low and promoting monetary easing as part of the tools to combat this pandemic, right? The financial tools to combat the pandemic and to stimulate the economy. So, so we could see a replay of the type of growth in financial assets that we saw back in 2008, 2009. And in fact, it's already happening. And so people need to pay attention to that and need to take advantage of that and become invested and take advantage of the low interest rates. So if you've already bought a home, it might be a good opportunity for you to think about refinancing your mortgage, right? You could potentially get some pretty interesting savings there. Yeah. If you haven't bought a home yet, this could be a good time because, again, assuming you've been able to maintain your job, mortgage rates are really, really low, and this could be a good time to make that initial purchase. So I think those are like 4 areas where people can really sort of focus on and think about making progress on in order to build some financial resiliency. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. There was so much in there. I just want to go back to maybe somebody who's watching who is saying that, he went from Wall Street, and you know, he already had his money made, and so you know, it's easy for him to invest in whatever he wants to invest in. Let's say someone hasn't got a good job. I just want us to summarize on how they can also build up and not assume that this is for the middle class person or this is for someone who is earning a good salary. Like you said, you had a side hustle. And now there's so many things that can be done online. You know, if you haven't got a great job, like, you know, there are things like Uber and, you know, so many things online that people can do as a side hustle if they're not ready for the stock market. But these are things that they can use to build. I just want you to help me sort of, you know, bring some of these things out, thinking about, you know, the person who is lower down the ladder who thinks that this is just for the middle class, who think that, you know, the middle class is all made and they already have the money to do what they have to do.
That's a really good point, Sylvia. But I would just point out from the audience, you know, investing is not just for middle class people or rich people. Investing is for everyone. You don't need even $10,000 to start, but you can invest with $500 or that. You know, every journey starts with one step.
Thank you.
And so the key is to make that initial step and get yourself in the infrastructure and the platform and the habit of doing these things, right? So it's not so much the amount that you start with, it's the fact that you're starting and making effort and that you're educating yourself about these things that are out there. Because of course, we all start out in life at the lower income ladder for most of us. And then as we progress, as we either gain more education or get promotions through our careers, our income levels go up, right, over time. That's historically what the trajectory is. And so, but the key is to start early because time is on your side. As you, even a small amount invested today builds with compounding interest, and that becomes a big pot of gold potentially at the end of the rainbow. So I think that's really the mindset that I would leave people with, that it's not about what amount you should start with. It's about the fact that you should at least take that first step and make that start. And then I think secondly, as you correctly pointed out, look, there's never been more democracy in entrepreneurship in the business landscape as there is today. With all these online platforms that are available now, it's so easy to build a business from the organically, whether it's selling items on Etsy or Amazon or this or that. There's just so many opportunities and platforms that actually makes it easier today for people to take advantage of their business skills and creativity relative to like 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago when those platforms didn't exist. So if people have an opportunity to diversify their income sources and have a skill set or craft or something that they think they can take advantage of, that's absolutely something that they should. And again, a lot of times it's not so. It's more the issue is getting someone to have the courage to take that initial first step, to make that move, to take that action to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Now, finally, do you have a final word for our viewers?
Too many words.
I know you have said a lot, and I'm truly appreciative.
I've been too many words already. But look, I think look, we've talked about a broad spectrum of things today. I think we started the conversation off with sort of careers, managing careers. How do you set yourself up for success? Career-wise, and then we obviously morphed into a little bit about how do you build financial resiliency for COVID. But I would say, underlying all those things, I would say be confident. Be confident. Be confident. Be visible. The one thing that I found was really, really helpful as I sort of look back at my own career, in addition to all the sort of the steps and things that I talked about, is visibility and confidence is really, really important. Obviously, it varies a little bit by industry, but Wall Street in particular is ruthless, right? You have to be visible. If you're out of sight, you're out of mind. No one is going to push you or promote you, so you have to push yourself. You have to promote yourself. You can't take the approach of, let me just go in, keep my head under the sand, do my work, cause no trouble, make no waves, and hope everything works out, right? And unfortunately, I think culturally, sometimes that's how we're trained, right? As Africans, we, trained to not make, not cause any waves, respect our elders, defer to our elders, so on and so forth. But that mentality doesn't always serve us well in a cutthroat corporate setting, right? So we have to almost force ourselves to be visible, to make sure that we're grabbing the bull by the horns, to make sure that if we do something well, that it's well telegraphed and publicized internally, that people are hearing our voices, that, when we go to meetings with clients, we're speaking up, and then we're not just a fly on the wall, things like that. So I would really encourage people as they think about managing their careers to keep that overarching theme in the background. Be vocal, be visible, be your own best advocate, and push yourself. When I think back in my own career, when I was the first time I was eligible to be promoted to managing director, I didn't get it, and that was a big setback. And it coincided with the financial crisis, because there were a lot of layoffs going on at the time. And the head of investment banking at the time said, "Look, you can't promote anyone unless you lay someone off, because the numbers are just not there." So that year, I didn't get it, and in fact, there were only 4 people in the entire investment bank that got promoted that year. But I went into my boss's office and registered my displeasure and said, "Look, this is unfair. I had the numbers. I had a, home run year. I deserve it. And you guys better make sure I get it next year. I understand that there's a little bit of a downdraft in the economy this year, but I better get it next year, or, I'm going to look at my options," right? So you have to have that type of aggressiveness and a little bit of self-promotion to make sure that you're visible, so that when people are sitting in the room thinking about, okay, who gets this project or that project, or who do we give this opportunity to or this promotion to, your name is always on the agenda and on the table. Because if you don't do that, you kind of get lost by the wayside. So that's the one career advice I would give to people. And obviously the finance stuff we've already talked about, but that was worth emphasizing.
Wow. Yeah. I cannot thank you enough. This has been amazing. And guys, you're getting it all for free. Because I couldn't pay Yaw for all of this.
Well, you've paid me in plenty other ways. So I'm just glad you invited me, and I'm really happy to be a part of it. Again, this is a really good platform, and hopefully you keep up the good work.
On behalf of my viewers and I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you so much. We have learned a lot, and we're grateful that you came. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Good.
Thank you.
All right.